Ladies and gentlemen, it's Saturday, it's Scotland, and it's 1 p.m. That means it's time for a Force for Good's Saturday street stall, coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. And this is the place where we're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want us to stay together. And that's the simple three-part message. We're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want us to stay together. And this is the place where we've got it all figured out, and there ain't no worries that we're worried about. Politically speaking, we know what's happening, and we're here to convey that knowledge to you. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is something that many of us were very happy to hear about yesterday, which is that the Nicola Adoration Show, the 1-hour daily broadcast courtesy of the British Broadcasting Corporation, that was, well, it looks like that's been put on the back burner, much to the anger of the Scottish Nationalists, who were hoping it was going to stay on the front hob of the stove. But now it's been put on the back burner, and it's in fact boiling over with rage. The Nationalists are boiling over with rage because no longer can they have their 1-hour ritual where they can adorate the Nicola on British broadcasting television. And the BBC was asked about this. How dare they do that? Well, from a Unionist perspective, why on earth have they been having her on for 1 hour a day, or however long she wants to witter on, as if she is the great Maimonides or Moses addressing us from the mountaintop, you know, with her words of unwisdom in this particular case. So the BBC's head of public policy was quizzed on that, and we read a short interview with him this morning on the internet. And he's claimed that, in fact, they're not getting rid of it entirely because they're still going to broadcast her online. So you can still go online to watch if you need your daily Nicola fix to tell you what's wrong with Scotland. And he says that they're going to continue the briefing occasionally on the actual TV itself, where it has news value. Where it has news value. Well, presumably that's not going to be very often, we should imagine. Now, of course, as has been pointed out to us, the BBC is the wrong place for her to be standing up and making these comments. The Scottish Parliament is where she should be making these comments. She shouldn't be making these comments on a public stage, getting broadcast by the public broadcaster each day. That's just absolutely an abuse. An abuse of power, quite frankly. The place for her to make a daily briefing on COVID, if it takes her fancy, is to do so whenever in Holyrood. And in Holyrood, she is then in front of her peers, and the fellow MSPs of all parties can quiz her in a way that they've been unable to do up until now. So maybe, if she had any sense, she will start to move that briefing to the Scottish Parliament and give us all a rest. And what on earth is the BBC going to do with that hour's broadcasting? What are they going to put at that awkward moment of the day, if not Nicola Sturgeon? Well, quite frankly, anything would be better. Anything would be better. You know, how about a 1,000-part documentary on the different types of Scottish rain, for example? Or maybe a 100-part documentary examining the various consistencies of Scottish dampness. You know, anything would be better. Anything would be more compelling viewing than listening to Nicola Sturgeon on a power trip on a matter that many of us are increasingly beginning to question anyway. So, at least that was one ray of sunshine in the COVID carry-on pantomime, the apparent ending for the time being of the Adoration of Nicola show and its confinement simply online. Now, good to see Tommy, thanks for coming in, and James, good afternoon to you. Ian, good to see you. Gillian says hi. Richard's watching as usual. James from Cooper, hello. And Avo from the south of England. And we have viewers from all over. Gaynor, great to see you. David says afternoon. Leslie says good afternoon. And Marie says hi from Pollock, Glasgow. Glasgow Pollock is Humza Yousaf's constituency, and unfortunately he's got quite a safe seat there. We'll be talking about that in a minute. Craig, keep up the good work. We always will, Craig. Thank you. John, keep fighting the good fight. We'll keep fighting the good fight with all our might. With all our might. Rob says respect. Jeff, greetings from Cornwall. Graham, hi to Graham, and hi to Alan, and to Elaine, and to Scott. Good number, Scott. Hope you're doing well these days. Hope to speak to you again on the thin red line soon. William says good luck. Elaine, better together. And Jean says, why would anyone want a daily fix from Nicola? Well, it's a very good question. I think there is a certain element of the population that do see her in a very psychologically dominant way. You know, they see her. She takes the position in their psyche that, you know, in the old days a Greek goddess or something would. Unfortunately, that's the case. Even though that sounds like an exaggeration, for them psychologically, it's almost like a replacement religion for some of them. Richard says just put the test card in for those minutes when she's no longer broadcasting. In fact, the test card would be a lot more interesting. It's certainly a lot more colourful to watch, no question about that. Janet says with you all the way. And yeah, Jean's got a comment there as well. Alex says hi. And Margaret says that she's a Scot living in England and she wants to stay in Britain as we have been for years. Absolutely, we've got to keep Britain together, and that's what we're all about here at A Force for Good. We're British, we love the United Kingdom, and we want to keep us together. And if we and our supporters have any say in the matter, we will keep us together, because that's the right thing to do. We're on the right side of history. Unity is more important than separation. Solidarity is more important than separation. The United Kingdom as one is more important than it broken up into struggling and aggressive and arguing bits and pieces. So we've got to try to find ways to rub along together, which is what we're about here at A Force for Good. Hi to Elaine, and to Alan, and to Margaret, who says afternoon, and Ray, good afternoon to you, Ray. Hope to see you soon as well. Gavin, hello from Ayr, and Derek from Perth. Hi to Andy and John and Dominic from Beverley. And Tommy from the Gorbals here in Glasgow. And Annette is still in Ben Al Madina. Good for you. Enjoy your time out there. And I hope you liked our wee book that we sent you, which we have been producing. A second edition now is out, so please do get the wee book, and I know it's getting lots of good feedback. Good. Well, you know, we're criticising Nicola Sturgeon, but we want to be clear here. We're going to criticise constructively where it's due, and just because we're Unionists doesn't mean that we love everything that the British Parliament is doing, for example. And I know that there's many people in England who are very concerned about the rules which have been brought in essentially by Boris Johnston's edict. Up here, Nicola Sturgeon gets to make the edicts. In England, it seems Boris Johnson gets to make the edicts about, you know, only 6 people can meet, and You can't visit families if there's going to be more than 6 of you in a house and things like that. And I was listening to that yesterday and I thought to myself, do you know what that comes across there is that's really un-British. It's very un-British what's coming out of his mouth at the moment. You know, un-British. That's not the way a parliamentarian, let alone a British Prime Minister, talks to the people. You don't say to the people, where a Briton's home is his castle, never forget. A Briton's home is his castle. You don't say to that Briton, you can't have more than 6 people in your house. That's very un-British. So I don't know what's come over him at the moment. And I can only, like many of us, hope and pray that sanity begins to be restored. But right now, these edicts are being made in the Union Parliament, and they're not setting a good example for the Union Parliament. And we'll be absolutely frank about that. The Union Parliament, the British Parliament, should not be doing what it's doing. If it's going to make laws, we have a constitution in this country that says Parliament has to vote on them. Parliament has to vote on these laws. You can't have like one man making the law and about 6 or 8 people sitting about an empty House of Commons and somehow going along with it. That's not the way that British democracy works. It's not the way that the British Constitution works. And for the last 6 months, we've almost seen an overthrowing of the British Constitution in the Union Parliament. And that does not bode well for British democracy, generally speaking, moving forward. That's an important point to make. So just because we're Unionists doesn't mean that we're going to give the British Parliament, the Union Parliament, a free pass. We're not going to do that when it is clearly doing stuff which is unconstitutional and ordering essentially people to stay in their houses and have no more than 6 people in their own house. That's unconstitutional, it's undemocratic, and we can only hope and pray that sanity is resumed. And we have to look about as well for those voices of sanity. And I heard a great one yesterday. From an MP called Sir Desmond Swayne, and you have to look up this guy. I've always liked Desmond Swayne. That's Swayne, a really nice chap, very dandy, dresses very well, got a scintillating personality. He's really, really good. He should really be the Prime Minister, and he's like a really old school traditional Tory who was making these points that I'm talking to you, that it's not really right for the British Parliament to do that. That's not what he and his peers were elected to do, just to allow Boris Johnson to make those decisions. And I did a little bit of research into Desmond yesterday, and I was delighted to discover that he went to school in Mossblown, okay, which is a mining town in Ayrshire, which is from where my family, the McConachies, the proximate area around which we, on both sides of the family, hail from. So I was delighted to see that, and that made me like him even more, from Mossblown. And he's also been in the army, and he's presently in the Territorial Army. And a few years ago, he actually did a tour of duty in Iraq while he was still an MP. So he's my kind of MP. He's my kind of MP. And he is the only one that I have seen yet speaking out about this from a very intelligent British constitutional, British legal point of view. So give him some support. Desmond Swayne is the man. He's presently an MP for one of the English constituencies. Now, somebody just messaged me there, and somebody's talking about Shetland. Yeah, Shetland. Let's talk about Shetland. And Donovan's watching from Canada. And Colin, good man Colin, I hope to meet you again. I think I've met you, if you know where and when. June, good afternoon from Cambuslang. And Reese from Fife. Good to see you guys in here. Good to see you all in here. And Marion from Dumfries. Jean, good afternoon from Glasgow. And Robert, hope you're doing well, Robert. Good to see you, and hope to see you again soon when we're back out on the streets. We're probably going to be aiming for maybe once a month or so. and whenever we are, we'll tell our key activists when that's going to be. So regarding, there's been some talk about both Shetland and Orkney breaking away, or at least having a vote to break away from Scotland, because they're not necessarily wanting independence either, and theoretically they might be able to argue that they could live off the oil wealth or something like that. Well, I don't know how serious those sorts of movements and those sorts of reports are, but when you look at it logically, there's no reason why they shouldn't if they wanted to. And this is the danger when you start breaking up the United Kingdom. Everybody's going to have an opinion, and everybody's going to say, well, why can't my little area break away? Why can't we have a little city-state here? Or why can't we have a separate island here or there? And these are the ways that things could move once you start to fragment the unitary state. So we're not particularly supportive of the idea at all of Shetland and Orkney moving away, and we certainly would not want them to, and we would argue against it, but it certainly has a certain logical appeal given the present circumstances that we're in at the moment. David from Royalist East Kilbride, good. And Yvonne, good to see you, Yvonne from sunny Hart Hill. Well, I'm glad to see it's sunny. It's a bit overcast here in the great British city of Glasgow at the moment. Janet from Falkirk, and Hector from Inverbervie. Wonderful. Give us a mention if you've got a comment or a question for us. Please fire that in. And we'll do our best to answer it. Now, I'm going to get on to, apparently there's a BLM march in London today, so that will be interesting to see how that goes down, and to see the reaction again of the British so-called establishment, because that was what really made us worry, was when Churchill's statue was first vandalised, and there was complete silence from Boris Johnson. And I'm not, he was the Prime Minister, and he literally lived 50 yards up the road, that if we had been in his position, we would have grabbed a megaphone, got some security, gone down to the Winston Churchill statue and stood there telling the people to keep away, because that would be leadership. That's what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom should do. That's certainly something that he of all people should do, considering that he's actually written the biography of Churchill. So the fact that he was absolutely silent about that for several days, and then when he actually did start to say something about it in the Daily Telegraph, the first few paragraphs of his article were criticising the London lads who had organised to defend the statue, and he was criticising them as bother boys and thugs. And I thought, that's the best that you can do. That's not good, man. That's not good. So what it also said to us is that the British establishment doesn't know now how to deal with these sorts of troublemakers, and especially that sort of attitude, which means that the rot has gone pretty deep, as we are aware, of course. Now, the Churchill statue was vandalised again this week. Again, somebody claiming that he was a so-called racist. Well, by the standards of today, very possibly he was, because after all, everybody's a racist today, so it seems, even though of course they're not really. That's what it seems like, because everybody just gets called that. But I heard a very profound point, actually, and it was in an interview with a man called Douglas Murray, who's the best commentator at the moment on these matters, and he was speaking to somebody from, I think the online internet is called Joe, or Joe something. Anyway, the interviewer said to Douglas Murray a very profound point. He said, it seems we've got to choose whether or not Churchill was either the greatest Briton or a massive racist. Well, why can't he be a bit of both? Why can't he be a bit of both? And that was the first time I had ever heard that articulated, and I thought it was a very funny point, but actually quite a profound point when you think about it. I mean, because after all, basically, back in those days, you know, to quote The Office with that Office joke, it's like the 1950s was before racism was wrong. And basically everybody seems to have been a racist prior to like maybe 1996, certainly by today's modern terms. So of course I'm delving here into absurdity to make the case, hyperbole to make the case that we should not be concerned about that sort of stuff, and we shouldn't use those accusations to back off in any way, because Churchill was still one of the greatest Britons, whatever you may think about his positions that he had on various other races of the world at that time and in that era. Which brings us to the article which had just been posted there in the comments. Dundas is a hero. Now, Dundas is our man, Henry Dundas, in St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh. And the SNP Council, in cooperation with the local BLM people, are trying and are intending to desecrate his memory and to desecrate his statue. And it, as many of you will know, we're making this like our case. The BLM people had a rally at the foot of his statue back on the 20th of June, and we had about 40 people there with us speaking out. I was on the microphone and I gave 3 speeches about Dundas, what he was about, and about this battle against the slave trade, and about all the British sailors who died as well, fighting for the abolition of slavery. Anyway, the latest thing is that the SNP Council, in cooperation with the BLM group, have produced a new plaque which they're going to splatter onto the bottom of the monument, which is just a bunch of lies, complete and utter lies, and not just lies, but absolutely illogical lies. Now, this is has to go through the planning application process, and the planning application process ends on Friday the 18th of September. That's next Friday. But comments, the application is open to comments on the Edinburgh planning application comment page, and at the moment there are about 1,000 comments, and it's about 2 to 1 for the desecration. There's about 600 and odd who want it to be desecrated. These are clearly SNP and BLM people who have been mobilized, and there's about 300 to 400 people who are against the desecration. So we'll put up the link in the comments here. What we suggest you do, if you'd like to weigh in support of Dundas, if you would like to object to this plaque, then please click that there, link to Dundas planning application form, and put in a good word for him. Put in a good word for him. And if you want to know the story behind that, then click on the link that we put there. Dundas is a hero. But basically, very briefly, what happened was that the year was 1792, and William Pitt the Younger wanted to abolish slavery in the British Empire. But he was facing a House of Commons and a Lords, many of whom were had vested interests in the industries which employed or which had slaves, which used slaves. And so it was going to be a difficult thing to get that through Parliament. And as we've spoken before, it wasn't actually until 1832 when Charles Grey brought in the Reform Act that cleared out a lot of, shall we say, corrupt MPs who only had their position because they were in boroughs where, in some cases, there was not even any electors. So it wasn't until 1832 that progress in the British Parliament was made on that, and indeed in 1833 slavery was abolished after the new in-lot of MPs came in 1833. However, going back to 1792, William Pitt the Younger tasked Henry Dundas to get this through Parliament as best as he could. And so what he did was he put an amendment into the Slavery Abolition Bill that said that the abolition would be gradual. And lo and behold, that succeeded in getting it through the House of Commons. But we all know, those of us who know how the British Parliament works, it then had to go to the Lords. And at the Lords, it failed, and it got chucked out. And that was back in the day when the Lords were the ultimate house. Today you can overrule the House of Lords, but back then in 1792, if the Lords said it wasn't going to be done, it wasn't done. So Henry Dundas did succeed in getting that bill through the House of Commons, which was an amazing piece of diplomacy, only for it to fail in front of the Lords. But here's the illogicality of the BLM position and the SNP Council position. They blame Henry Dundas for delaying the abolition of slavery, when in fact it's nothing to do with Henry Dundas. He did his best at the time, and he got it halfway through Parliament. And so why are they even blaming him at all? It makes no sense, and it only makes sense if you accept that these people either don't know how the British Parliament works or don't even know what they're talking about. And I think the latter is probably largely the case. So we make all these points, we lay it out very clearly in our article. Dundas is a hero, and so you might want to read that. It's a short article, have a look at that, and then make your case why this plaque should not go up, because it is illogical and it's frankly wrong. And it states here, the plaque is going to state that this plaque was dedicated to the memory of more than 500,000 Africans whose enslavement was a consequence of Henry Dundas's actions. That's just lies! Utter lies! It's not even historically correct. It's complete nonsense. Yet you're smearing this man's name. And this man, in his age and in his time, was actually what we would call a progressive today. Henry Dundas wanted Irish Catholics to get the vote. That was an unusual thing for MPs at the time to want. He was an advocate of Gaelic in the Highlands, and he was a Unionist as well. It should be added. He supported the Unionists and he supported the Hanoverian succession. So he was, he's a great man, and he deserves his statue. And people say, oh, but he got impeached. Well, he did make some enemies in the Parliament, and some people will say it was because he was quite Scottish, and that maybe some of the types in the Parliament didn't really like his brash style. Anyway, he got impeached, which simply means charged by his peers, and he chose to be tried, as it were, in front of the House of Lords, and every single charge against him was thrown out, and thrown out overwhelmingly. So it was probably a setup in many ways, but he never went into politics after that final bad experience in his life. But he was the man who, as First Lord of the Admiralty, built up the British Royal Navy so that it was ultimately to defeat Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar a few years later. So we're all for Henry Dundas. Henry Dundas is the man, quite frankly, and we're not going to hear a bad word said against him. And if you can, please put in a good word for him. Please do so at that link to the Dundas planning application, where the SNP Council, to its utter shame, is intending to desecrate this great monument. Okay, so if you can do that, thank you very much, and let's get some good comments in there, because you can be assured that all the other comments are just Scottish nationalists or BLM people who don't know any better. They don't know any better, so they need to read our articles on that matter so that they can understand that, in fact, this is a Scotsman that you should be supporting. you're the Scottish National Party, you should be supporting Scottish people, not dumping on their memory. Anyway, that's what we're looking at, and that the planning application there, that ends this coming Friday. So bang in a comment there if you can, folks. If you've got any comments or questions, please do send them in. Sandra's watching from Cairn Larich. Good to see you, Sandra. Andrew's wondering what on earth Boris is doing, handing the nationalists ammo to use against us. Do you want to expand upon exactly what you mean there, Andrew? Do you have a particular thought, a particular thing that you're saying that he's doing at the moment, other than this COVID carry-on, of course? David says, thanks for raising this. It's important that we all add our objections. Absolutely, David. It is indeed. There's also a good organisation out there called Save Our Statues, which you can find on Twitter, and the New Culture Forum is also doing a lot of good work on this. Peter Whittle, the London Assembly member, is very much to the fore in standing up for British history on YouTube and also on Twitter. We are still banned. Well, we're not banned, we're suspended from Twitter. That's still ongoing. Every week we're appealing. We send in an official appeal form every week. But as every week goes by, it gets more and more likely that they're probably not. But we hold out hope that they will reinstate us. But in the meantime, what you can do is please go to aforceforgood.uk/support. And please put in your name and your email, so that way we've got a direct way to contact you and to tell you what we are doing all the time. You can also please go to our youtube.com/UK A Force for Good channel. We've done a fantastic wee YouTube video, a wee advert for our channel, and we're asking people please to subscribe. Click the red button. You'll need a YouTube account. Click the red button and then click the bell for notifications, and you'll be subscribed to our YouTube channel. And we need to get that to 1,000 views. Sorry, 1,000 subscribers. When we have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of views, then we're going to be able to broadcast on an Android, and we're going to ensure that our system will be eligible for ad revenue as well. So we're going to really push the YouTube thing. In fact, it's been suggested to us that next week we may just broadcast only on YouTube, just to get the views on there, just to get people knowing that this is where we can also view us. So we'll keep you informed about that on Facebook, obviously, but please do make sure that you've also got the YouTube thing switched on there as well, because we may sometimes just switch from Facebook onto YouTube. That's when we're going to get really very good at this. When we get very good at it, we'll do all these sorts of things. But next week we may just do a trial screening just on YouTube. We're thinking about that at the moment, but we'll keep you informed anyway about what's happening next Saturday's street stall. But it will be here in the office, here in our great British city of Glasgow. We'll be doing a Saturday street stall. Might just be on YouTube alone, but we will keep you informed one way or the other on that. But we need to get the subscribers up there. We're about 690 at the moment. We need to get to 1,000 subscribers before we can start to broadcast on an Android mobile phone. Linda says, every success from the Midlands, United Kingdom, we are better together. So true, so true. Alan says, excellent work, thank you. Maggie says, God bless from Nottingham. God bless you also, Maggie. Martin wishing us every success from Cambridgeshire. Great, great. And Evelyn, good for you for getting to the truth of the matter. That's right. And there's another monument in Edinburgh that's being threatened by the Scottish Nationalists, and it's in the same square, and it's one of the 4th Earl of Hopetoun. And I'm just going to talk about this very briefly, because when we first saw this, we knew that they're against him because he put down a slave rebellion. And as soon as I read that, I thought, that's rubbish. Just that whole thing, what they've done there is wrong. So I had to look into it. Spent a day last week researching this guy. And what this was actually back in the same period that we're talking about, the late 1800s, the British and the French were fighting down in the West Indies because they owned essentially some of the islands. We held the others. And in some of the islands, there was French and British communities left over from previous arguments. And so what this was basically part of those wars, the British against the French. And during those wars, some of the indigenous or the imported slaves sided with the British, and some of them sided with the French. But it was at that period of revolutionary unrest in the West Indies, and there was quite a few wars, British battles were fought down there, and he was involved in one of them. So it was basically British versus French. But the SNP Council talking about, oh, he put down a slave rebellion, is a complete, so tangential basically to what was going on. There was a rebellion that was led, you could say, by a former slave. Phaedon was his name. But to portray this as just some kind of racist thing without looking at it within the context of the whole British-French Napoleonic battles of that age is just so ridiculous and so childish and just so wrong, just so out of context. But that's what they do. They put all these battles out of context. But we're going to write a big article on that. We've ordered a couple of books, including manuscripts that were written by British officers at that place in Granada. So we're looking forward to poring over them and giving you the takeaway from that. Somewhere down the line, 2 or 3 weeks down the line, we'll do an article on that, because that's another statue that they're going to try to attack. Well, they're already attacking it, basically. They're already attacking it. And in the current environment, nobody wants to defend it, apart from a force for good. So that's why we're here. And if you support the work that we're doing, please go to aforceforgood.uk. Along the top, you'll see shop. And if you go to the shop, you can buy our wee badge, which is this behind me. It says A Force for Good. Through the middle of it is the classic Union heart. And you can also get the classic Union heart itself with A Force for Good written through it. And if we put up the links there to these badges and to the shop, please, where you can get that. And you can also get campaigning tools. You know, if you're for the UK, you need to have a Union Jack in your house, a 3x2 Union Jack. Now, we had these custom made. They've got an open hem, which means you can put a stick or a bamboo stick or a metal pole through it and fly it that way. So there's no awkwardness about how to attach it to anything. It's 3x2. It's really, really nice, good quality. And of course, we've also got umbrellas, Union Jack umbrellas, because if you're out and it's a rainy day and you're doing activism with A Force for Good, this is as good as a flag. In fact, it's better than a flag if it's a rainy day. So you want to get yourself a Union Jack umbrella, and you can get that from our shop as well. I was sent an article this morning by a colleague of mine. Hi May, from Fife. David, what about the About Turn on Land of Hope and Glory, a British institution? Yes, we touched on that the last week. It was at least good to hear that that they're going to sing it anyway. And the point that we made last week is these songs, especially Rule Britannia, are living things. They're not anachronisms. If you're out with A Force for Good, if you're with us on our Thin Red Line, we're singing that, or at least we're shouting it when the Scottish Nationalists pass by. So it's a real thing. It's a real thing. It's a real living thing. These songs are real living things. They're part of not just our heritage, but our day-to-day life, especially if you live here in Glasgow. Christopher says, say hello to Phil, Cliff and Ross. Thank you. Keep up the good work. John says, where's your office? We're here in the great British city of Glasgow. James says, just put up my objections to the replacement Dundas plaque. Excellent, James. Well done. Love that. Thank you. Thank you. Dorothy says, keep going from Kilmarnock. Well, we will keep going. We've been going since the 12th of March 2012, and we have no intention of stopping. Okay? With your help, we will be here every single day, fighting the good fight, keeping the British end up, as we like to say. Scott says, keep fighting. Absolutely. There's the flag badge, 2 flag badges there. The links are in there. Please do buy them. What happens is, for example, some people buy one for each of their children, or if they're sending a card, like a birthday card to somebody, buy one, and they put that, they attach that into the card, into the birthday card. So that's a nice added wee gift, and they're selling well. They're selling well, and there's the Union Jack flags up there. Christopher says, going to check out the shop. Can you say hello? Yep, done that. Phil, Cliff, and Ross. Good to hope you're watching, and please keep watching. Stuart watching from Kent. Good. Keep up the good work protecting our precious union. That's right, and it is precious, and it's almost like a precious vase, because sometimes people don't understand how precious it is until it's broken, and it's easily broken. It's easily broken. You know, that's the lesson of history. These things, you don't necessarily know about them until they're gone, and then you realize what you've lost. So, and it easily broken like a precious vase. Steve has sent his objection in. Thank you, Steve. We need folk to send in their objection. If you just post that objection link again, please, team. Just keep it in there. It doesn't matter if it goes in a couple of times or more. Just bang that one in there so that people can just click on it. And remember to put your name, address, be polite, be diplomatic, and remember to click the object button. Thank you very much. And we need to get that in before Friday. Just getting a little bit more political here. Somebody sent us a letter that they had sent to the Daily Telegraph in response to a letter that had been published in there. Very good letter that in response, but let me just tell you what the person that he was responding to said. This was somebody claiming to be a unionist, I don't doubt, and saying that if the SNP were to win a majority next year, the Scots should be given a second referendum, because the Scottish future should be determined by the people who live there. Now, this is something that the Scottish nationalists always say, that Scotland's future should be determined by the people who live here. Well, that's the case at the moment, and the people who live here have determined to keep voting in British general elections, and have determined in 2014 to stay part of the United Kingdom, and have determined at every general election to vote for somebody who goes to the British Union Parliament. That the people of Scotland are doing that every time they go to the ballot box. They're determining their own future, and hitherto that future has been a unionist determined one. So there's nothing out the ordinary or different with that phrase than what is already happening at the moment. But it's the way that it's being used which can be tricky. And as this colleague wrote in the letter to the Daily Telegraph, and I'll quote it here, it's well said: on the subject of Scottish independence, your letter writer believes in the fundamental right of self-determination by those who live here. That's all very well, but I thought that this was already settled for a generation, and some said a lifetime, in 2014. Absolutely. And here's the point. Why do so many Westminster politicians seem to accept that a vote for the Union is only valid till the next referendum, but a vote for separation is forever? Surely such a momentous matter should only be settled by a continuous assessment of the Scottish mood over a very long period of years, and not by glibly accepting the result of perhaps a tiny minority in a make or break contest as some kind of settled will. Quote. And he adds, who, apart from the SNP, thought it was a good idea in the Referendum Scotland Act to extend the franchise, which already allowed 16-year-olds to vote, to include everyone resident in Scotland, regardless of nationality or length of time in the country? Well, who apart from the SNP? Unfortunately, I have to tell you, the SNP, the Greens, the Lib Dems and the Labour Party all voted in Holyrood for that very unfortunate bill, which essentially throws out the idea of national citizenship from Scotland, which of course, if you're a globalist, you love. It was a serious defeat for the forces of Scottish nationalism, even, if you want, because it threw away the idea of specific Scottish citizenship of the Scottish nation. It just said everybody can vote if they live here. And that power was devolved to them, unfortunately, in the 2016 Scotland Act by the Tory party at the time. Unfortunately, that power, even though we warned strongly against devolving that power. Strongly against devolving that power, because an absolute catastrophe. You're just giving power to the Scottish National Party, to Holyrood, which is essentially the Scottish National Party, to gerrymander the vote, which is exactly what they did. Yes. So somebody also sent us something this morning that's been published in today's Times. And this comes up every so often, so we're going to hear more about it this week. Somebody's published, a think tank has published a report saying what Scotland needs is more powers. Well, we've heard that a zillion times, and as we always say, what more powers will do is will just move Scotland further and further towards separation. And if you want to bring in like a home rule bill for Scotland, that's not going to change anything either. You'll simply be giving more powers to the Scottish Parliament. You'll be moving them more closer to the point where they can say nothing is now going to change if we become independent. You're just making it easier for them to get their way. It's what's called a stepping stone to separation. And we produced this leaflet, Federalism, Why It's Just a Stepping Stone to the Breakup of Britain. We make the case for UK-wide solidarity, not division. And in the back of it, we list 8 reasons why. 8 reasons why. And we also have written several articles on this matter. One of them we can put up there in the comments about federalism and why it's not any kind of solution. And when people think about federalism, they think about an English Parliament. But what this group is actually talking about is simply more powers for Scotland. It's not getting into the English Parliament thing at all. It's just talking about more powers for Scotland, which is what the Labour Party and the Lib Dems mean when they use the phrase home rule. They just mean more powers for Scotland. They don't mean an English Parliament per se. And more powers for Scotland would simply mean Scotland doing more things apart. And it wouldn't address the real issue here anyway, because as we always say, the issue is not one about where are powers best located. For your hardcore Scottish nationalist who drives Scottish nationalist policy, who drives Scottish national politics, the issue is that Scotland and England are two fundamentally different countries, and the people are two fundamentally different people as well. That's what drives them. So even home rule will make no difference to their desire for separation, because their demand for independence is based upon a belief in a fundamental difference between the Scottish and English, which in their minds can only be resolved, can only be satisfied with complete separation. So you're doing nothing to pacify, you're doing nothing to mitigate, you're doing nothing to ameliorate that demand. You're simply giving the Scottish nationalists more powers, and they will take those powers without thanks. They will bank them, and then they will pretend that they never received them. And that's what they did with all the 2016 powers, which was a massive movement of powers to Hollywood. The top MSPs and MPs today will tell you that they got nothing, or they'll pretend essentially that they got nothing, or they didn't get enough. These people will never be satisfied. That's just the way that it is. So when we see people producing reports like that, we say either you don't know about politics, you don't know about Scottish politics, or if you do, you never learn, or this is just a hobby for you, and you're not really applying your brain to this effort. So yeah, don't get us started on that. We've got a lot to say, and we will always have a lot to say on that. And you know what? If you're like the BBC and you need to fill the Nicola Sturgeon Adoration Hour, if you need to fill it maybe with an hour's unionism, give us a call. We'll be happy to step up. We'd love to stand in front of that microphone and just talk for an hour to the nation. And you know what? I was reading this morning, her viewing figures for that broadcast, that daily broadcast, was 280,000 people. 280,000 people on average viewing Nicola Sturgeon each day. Those are massive figures, especially for Scottish television. Goodness sake, massive figures. So no wonder she's rising in the polls. No wonder she's rising in the polls with those kind of viewing figures. That's extraordinary. And that doesn't include, that's 280,000 on BBC Scotland. Sorry, 280,000 on BBC One Scotland and 40,000 on BBC Scotland. So that's 320,000 people. Average viewing of Nicola Sturgeon's programme. That's ridiculous. That's what the BBC has done to Scotland. It has given her that daily show with those viewing figures. And when you think that groups like us, A Force for Good, we've never even been invited onto anything by the BBC or STV ever, you know, and we're not expecting a phone call any day soon or any moment soon. So that just shows you the power that the mainstream media still possess. And a lot of that 320,000 will be what's called low information people, which is people who don't have access to the internet and who don't have access to alternative stories and alternative facts about these matters. And that's 320,000 people who are effectively just scaring themselves each day by watching that sort of stuff, maybe getting some kind of weird thrill from being scared in that way. But these are not people who have got access to alternative information. That's for certain. Well, if you watch A Force for Good, or if you follow any of our material, you will have access to alternative information, and especially alternative history as well, and just alternative ways of looking at reality. Good. Who's coming in here? Who's saying hello? James says, stick your Union Jack somewhere. That's a rude comment. Well, we're going to stick it at the top of the highest hill in Scotland, and you're going to be looking at it and watching it, and you're going to have to say, gosh, there's the British Unionists out in force, and isn't it wonderful to be part of our United Kingdom, because we're British and we want us to stay together, and we don't like the idea of separating. Ray says he was one of the 4 million plus who were not watching. Good. So are we. Yeah, alternative history. On this day, 12th of September, Cleopatra's Needle was erected on the embankment, and that was a gift. That was a gift from a chap called Muhammad Ali, in commemoration of the victory of Lord Nelson at the Battle of the Nile and the victory of the Scotsman Sir Ralph Abercrombie at the Battle of Alexandria. And if you go to its dedication says, which I like, this obelisk, prostrate for centuries on the sands of Alexandria, was presented to the British nation in 1819 by Muhammad Ali, Viceroy of Egypt, a worthy memorial of our distinguished countrymen, Nelson and Abercrombie. On the 12th of September in 2003, Johnny Cash died. I've seen Johnny Cash twice at the Sands Centre, and once Sands Centre Carlisle, and once in the Albert Hall. And there's a picture of him, Johnny Cash, in Edinburgh, on Edinburgh Esplanade on the castle, after a 1981 TV broadcast with Andy Stewart from Falkland Palace in Fife. And I was reading this and I thought, Andy Stewart, like, I presumed it was the Andy Stewart of Donald Where's Your Trousers, but it was actually the American crooner Andy Stewart and Johnny Cash at Falklands Palace. And I thought, I bet you that was a mix-up with the booking agents. Like, they phoned the BBC guy, and the BBC guy goes, well, there's a singer called Andy Stewart. He's got a really good song, Donald Where's Your Trousers. He could be with Johnny Cash. It'd be quite a good, you get your Scotsman, you get your American doing the Christmas broadcast from Falkland Palace. And I bet you the Hollywood agency goes, oh yeah, Andy Stewart, I know the man, yeah, I'll get him on. And they booked the guy from Las Vegas. I bet you that was a mistake. I'm just surmising, but I can't believe why on earth Andy Stewart, the American crooner, was singing in Falklands Palace when it should have been Andy Stewart, the Scotsman. Anyway, I don't lose too much sleep over that, but I do sometimes think about that. On the 13th of September, Noor Inayat Khan was executed. Now, this is a very interesting woman who fought for the British during World War II, and she was an SOE, which was the Special Operations Executive, and she was half Muslim and half American. And I don't think she was a British citizen per se, but she was originally in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and she could speak French, and that was why she got into the SOE. And there's a really nice wee memorial to her in Gordon Square Gardens in London, and we'll post about that. Also on the 13th of September, the Battle of Tel El Kebir was fought in 1882 between the Egyptian and Sudanese versus the British and British Indian Army, led by Sir Garnet Wolseley. And this was because Prime Minister Gladstone sent them over there to restore order and maintain British dominance in the region, particularly over the Suez Canal. And this battle came to my particular attention because of a fantastic poem on it by William McGonagall. And this is his complete set that we've got here in the office. And I just read a couple of verses to you, which I really like. Ye sons of Great Britain, come join with me and sing in praise of Sir Garnet Wolseley. Sound drums and trumpets cheerfully, for he has acted most heroically. And it goes on in that vein, and I really like that sort of cadence. It's a little bit quirky, and we do that ourselves sometimes with our little poems that we make up. And it was led by a guy called, the opposition was led by a guy called Pasha Arabi. Arabi's army was about 70,000 in all, and virtually speaking it wasn't very small. But if they had been as numerous again, the Irish and Highland brigades would have beaten them, it is plain. And of course the British did win, and they won a famous victory. General Sir Archibald Allison led on the Highland Brigade, who never were the least afraid. And such has been the case in this Egyptian war, for at the charge of the bayonet they ran from them afar. With their bagpipes playing and one ringing cheer, and the 42nd soon did the trenches clear. Then hand to hand they did engage, and fought like tigers in a cage. And I think this is my favourite verse. Oh, it must have been a glorious sight to see Sir Garnet Wolseley in the thickest of the fight, in the midst of shot and shell and the cannon's roar, whilst the dead and the dying lay weltering in their gore. Fantastic poem. And McGonagall was a real British patriot and royalist, and he wrote a lot of stuff, and he was a big empire booster as well. And, you know, he gets a bad rep, and I bet you it was just because, you know, certain elements in the day did not like that kind of attitude. I bet you that's why he's really got the bad rap that he's got. You know, it's not because of whether his poems are good or bad. I mean, crying out loud. I mean, that's such a ridiculous way to attack him. I bet it was more personal than that. I bet he had his enemies, and they didn't like the fact that Queen Victoria liked him, and that Sir Garnet Wolseley even wrote him back a letter saying how much he liked the poem. Anyway, 14th of September coming up next week. Team GB came home to Glasgow back in 2012, and there's some good photographs there of St George Square in Glasgow, festooned with Union Jacks being waved by members of the public. On the 14th this week coming, the Duke of Wellington died. And of course on the 15th of September is Battle of Britain Day, which commemorates the largest aerial battle that took place over London on that day in 1940. And on the 15th of September in 2018, we were out on the streets of the great British city of Glasgow. Our Thin Red Line was there, and we were standing up to the SNP supporting march which was passing by. And that particular march proved to be a massive flop. It passed us in 2 minutes, and we referred to it as the shortest march in the history of short marches. And there's a video of that as well, which we can put up on the site. And I mean, it was such it marched round Argyle Street, then it went up to George Square, and there was a report that evening in the Evening Times, and I think the Evening Times reporter captured this so well. It's one of the best reports of a political rally I've ever read, and I'm going to read it to you just now because it's just a classic. And this is the Evening Times reporter describing the SNP rally in George Square on the 15th of September 2018. Passers-by stopped briefly to watch, but soon moved on. Taxi drivers wound their windows down and watched as they waited at a rank in George Square. It's all kicking off. It's all kicking off. One driver, who asked not to be named, said he was glad the demo was, quote, not too big, close quote, because if more people had attended, it may have prevented him using the taxi rank. He said, quote, I find it interesting, but I'm not a supporter of independence, close quote. So that was one of the funniest descriptions that we've read of it. On the 15th of September in 1864, the British explorer John Hanning Speke died accidentally by shooting himself in a hunting accident, and it was he who discovered the source of the Nile. Isambard Kingdom Brunel died on the 15th of September in 1859, and he's what we call one of Britain's great connectors. He's like the Scotsman Thomas Telford, who built so many bridges and railways and boats and canals and docks that he literally unified the nation. That while he may or may not have been a political unionist, his actions were unionist. His actions literally unified the British Isles as Isambard Kingdom Brunel. On the 16th of September in 2017, a Force for Good's Thin Red Line was out on Union Street against another SNP march. And that lasted for a bit longer. I think that one lasted for about 11 minutes. And we've got a video that we produced on Facebook as well. And that was back before we decided to count them, because we realised basically shortly after then that they were lying hugely about their numbers. So we don't have an exact figure for that particular march, but we do have the video, and it was where we first put out our Union City Glasgow banner. Union City Glasgow. Because the Nats would always say, oh, it's a yes city. Glasgow's a yes city. No, Glasgow is a union city. It's a union city. And that's our message to them whenever we go out there. Glasgow is a union city. And that video went viral. It got 160,000 views. And it got 5.4 thousand comments. And these comments were brilliant. I mean, they were mainly all against us. The Nats were having a conniption fit. Oh, they were going mad. But something that really that really came to our attention back then was just the political ignorance of so many of the Scottish nationalists. And one of the comments which we saved that day, and which we are recalling to memory just now, is from a chap who is a Scottish nationalist who was enraged that we were calling Glasgow a union city. And he goes, correct me if I am wrong, but the union is only about 60 or 70 years old, if that. So Glasgow's not a union city, pal. So you lie, just like the Tories. Well, let's forget the last couple of lines there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes, you are wrong. You are wrong. The union is older than 60 or 70 years, if that, as you say. And that made us realise, you know, these folk, bless them, have got no education about the British Constitution, no education about the British state, no education about the British nation. This chap thinks that the union, 60 years old, well, that would be, what, back like during World War II we decided to have the union? 70 years old? 1950? 1947? He obviously thinks the union, the British Union, came in just after the Second World War. I mean, how can you have a political debate with somebody like that? That was upsetting, but it was also quite amusing when we realised just what's going on out there, you know, what's going on out there. So we do our best to educate people about the British state and about the British nation, and we have produced our wee book for the Union. If you stick the link up there, please. A wee book for the Union does talk about, takes us right back to the dawn of time, to the modern age, historically, shows the important political movement, and basically makes the case that the United Kingdom today is much more than a union of nations. The United Kingdom is a nation of unions. We're much more than a family of nations. We are in fact quite literally a nation of families. So folks, thank you very much for watching. Nelson, hello there. Andrew, hi. Hi to you. Stuart, talking about the polls. Don't put too much. The polls have to be taken seriously, and the polls have to be taken seriously, but also remember that polling is a black art. It doesn't so much reflect opinion as lead opinion, and all the power and the money is with the Nats at the moment, especially with the opinion polls. You've got to remember that one of their former MPs has set up a polling company because he understands that it is a black art, and so he understood that he could set up a polling company and move the polls in certain directions. So be cautious about the polls, but also take them seriously, but also know that very often we're being played. whatever John says, whatever England wants it gets. Well, we've looked at that before. It's not actually correct, John, but I know that some Scottish people, Scottish nationalists, people like to promote that particular point of view. Greg says he's never been asked to take part in a poll. Neither have I, for example. Billy's from Kirkcudbright. Good man. Kirkcudbright's a lovely wee town. A nice wee harbour there as well. There's our videos are up. Greg says, well done, Ali. Rule Britannia, no surrender. Thomas remembers the videos. Lovely, fantastic. They're quite something, and our videos on the Thin Red Line are quite something. There's no question about that. If you'd like to join us on the Thin Red Line, of course, just get in contact with us and we'll Facebook friend you, and we will take it from there. Okay, that's the inner circle, are the people that we invite to these marches and to our street stalls and things like that. There's the wee books for sale. And Richard's just pointing out, so much has been neglected in education and everything. That's absolutely so true. And if the house is neglected, it will eventually fall to pieces. There is so much to be done by men and women of goodwill. And if you agree with that, then please do help our work. We are trying to build up our message and our ideas, because we've got the answer. We've got the Unionist answer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. We'll be back at 1 o'clock next week. If we're going to live stream totally on YouTube next week, we will tell you. But in the meantime, please do get yourself subscribed. Get yourself an account on YouTube, and please get yourself subscribed to A Force for Good's YouTube page. We need to get up over 1,000. That's really going to be a thing that we've got to do before the end of the year. So folks, it just remains for me to say thank you for watching. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen.